midlife sucks. And in fact, it's a really bad brand if you think about it. Like the only word attached to midlife is crisis. So like, oh, that's not exactly a brand people want to mosey up to. The flatline experience allowed me to just say like, okay, I am ready for a major transition in my life. And over the next couple of years, I made changes in everything. And around age 50, I was sort of liberated to like, oh, I have a blank slate here. How do I want to curate my life?
Hi friends, Scott Shute here from Changing Work, where our mission is to change work from the inside out and make work a more inspiring and compassionate place to be. I'm here with my friend and mentor and all-around amazing human, Chip Conley. Hey Chip, how are you?
Scott, you're my mentor too. So we are mutual mentors. Thank you. It's an honor to be here and look forward to talking.
Everybody would love to know how you became Mr. Midlife. Your new book is coming out, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. When you were a student at Stanford, did you ever think that you would be Mr. Midlife?
No, I didn't think that, nor did I think I'd be a modern elder, which we'll talk about that too. Okay, let me give you for those who don't know me, a quick overview, and it'll be brief. At 26, I started a boutique hotel company called Joie de Vivre, meaning joy of life. For the next 24 years, I ran that and we became the second largest boutique hotelier in the US. I was the CEO. 52 boutique hotels around California. We were based in San Francisco. And I loved it till I hated it. In my late 40s, I had a midlife crisis on many levels, relationship-wise, family-wise, just running out of cash, not wanting to be CEO of this company anymore with 3,500 employees, and pretty much everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And I had a flatline experience and had an NDE based upon a near-death experience based upon an allergic reaction to an antibiotic. So first note about Mr. Midlife here is midlife sucks. And in fact, it's a really bad brand if you think about it. Like the only word attached to midlife is crisis. So like, oh, that's not exactly a brand people want to, mosey up to. What that allowed me to do though is the flatline experience allowed me to just say like, okay, I am ready for a major transition in my life. And over the next couple of years, I made changes in everything. And around age 50, I was sort of liberated to say like, oh, I have a blank slate here. How do I want to curate my life? And, I won't go into details on it. I spent 2 years really having a bit of a sabbatical. I wrote a book and I did a couple other things, but I had some space, and I had what's called a midlife atrium by Mary Catherine Bateson. And I really do think we all need a midlife atrium, a space where you can have a little bit of a sabbatical, gap year, whatever it is, to look at how you want to consciously curate this second half of your adult life. And at age 52, I got a call from Brian Chesky, one of the co-founders and CEO of Airbnb, tiny little tech startup at that time, growing quickly. This was 11 years ago. I didn't even know what Airbnb was, really. And next thing I knew, I was their modern elder. And I don't like that title, but they said, Chip, you're twice the age of the average person here, and you're as curious as you are wise. And I was like, oh, okay. I like the alchemy of curiosity and wisdom. And so I spent 4 years full-time as the in-house mentor to the founders and the head of global hospitality and strategy. And then I spent 3.5 years after that as the part-time strategic advisor, taking them up to the IPO. And what an experience. Loved it. I decided to write a book about that experience down in Baja, where I had a beach home. The book's called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. And while I was writing that book, I was doing runs on the beach, and I had a Baja aha, an epiphany, which was, why do we not have midlife wisdom schools? Why don't we have a place for people in midlife to reimagine and repurpose themselves? And that's how MEA, the Modern Elder Academy, came about. And long story short is, my bona fides in terms of why I'm Mr. Midlife, we just came up with this, guys. This is like, we'll see if this lasts more than, this conversation, is because I also lost 5 friends to suicide in midlife. 5 men, age 42 to 52. None of them knew each other, so they're completely unrelated suicides. And that was during the Great Recession from 2008 to 2010. So long story short is I'm fascinated by this life stage that I think now is a midlife chrysalis. It's the opportunity for transformation to occur in what can be a dark, solitary, gooey time. And hopefully on the other side of that, you become a butterfly pollinating your wisdom in the world.
That's awesome. Well, having been to MEA a bunch of times, both as a participant and now as an instructor sometimes,
Yeah.
I just want to thank you. Thank you for creating this place. Such a beautiful container, both physically, but also a place where people can go for a week and just figure out who they want to be for the next half of their life. So
Yeah.
thank you.
It's needed. We don't have, you were just co-leading a workshop on rituals and for transitions. And like, we don't really have rites of passage and rituals in midlife.
Yeah.
We have them early in life. We have them, when we die with a funeral, but we don't really have a lot. And we really do need a place for people to sort through how they might want to shift their life, but also to do that in community and with a certain amount of collective ritual involved.
And one of the things I'm now aware of is that midlife is kind of a new thing. Like we have this term called middle essence, like adolescence. Yeah. This is new. This wasn't a thing 60 or 100 years ago, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, well, let's see. First of all, adolescence wasn't a thing either until 1904. It was a life stage, but it didn't have a name. And quite frankly, once you hit puberty before 1904, you were an adult. So adolescence is a modern construction, as is midlife, because the average person lived till just 47 years old in 1900, but just by 2000, they lived till 77. So we added 3 decades of life in 1 century in the US. And so midlife became a thing. It got, the term midlife crisis got coined in 1965. And that's when people gave a lot of attention to midlife. So in some ways, the problem with midlife is that it's a new construction because people are living longer. And the way people popularized way started to think about it was this era of life where you're disappointed and dejected, and you sort of go back to adolescence, and you buy a red sports car and have an affair. And that is such a terrible trope to try to describe what is a life stage that is really the liminal stage between early adulthood and later adulthood.
Amazing. So you had all these experiences, and each one of us has our unique alchemy of our own experiences we bring to this time in our life, which is a little bit variable, but we each hit it differently. If you could go back in time to the, whatever it was, late 40s, early 50s Chip, with whatever you've learned now by kind of collecting the world's experts on midlife, what are 1 or 2 or 3 lessons that really would have changed you or changed, these your friends who really struggled and, even took their own lives?
Well, I would just say, you don't have to have an NDE to change your life. So for so many of us, midlife is like this, excuse the expression, but like this clusterfuck, this like everything's happening at once. And Bruce Feiler, one of our teachers, MEA teachers, says it's a life quake. So it's like having many things happening at once. And I think my first lesson would be, you don't have to wait for all these external circumstances to make change in your life. You can actually be a lot more intentional. If you are self-reflective enough and aware enough, and the audience of people who listen to you, Scott, are those people, you can have a sense of whether something's not working or not. All right. You don't just look at a day or a week or even a month to say if something's not working right. Don't get divorced just because you had a bad month with your spouse. But you can see the trend line. One of the nice things about getting older is we can see pattern recognition, and we are able to sort of think holistically a little bit better. So we can sort of piece together our life and say, like, is this working? So I'd say my first lesson is you can be more intentional as opposed to being in a situation where involuntarily you have to change. I think a second lesson would be this idea of the 3 stages of a transition. The ending of something, the messy middle, and the beginning of something new. Once you know that structure, the ending of something, you've got to say goodbye to something. And that's why ritual is really valuable there. The messy middle is where you're awkward and it's uncomfortable, and you need social support during that time. You also need to sort of see the through line of how you're going to get through this and what it's going to look like on the other side, because you have to have a little bit of hope. And then the third stage of the beginning of something new is like the butterfly coming out of the chrysalis. And most butterflies, when they come out of the chrysalis, actually end up on the ground because their wings are wet and they've never flown before. So you need to have a growth mindset. You need to be willing to learn and improve and be open to being a beginner again, which for a lot of people in midlife is a hard one because it makes you feel somehow like you're getting the game of life wrong. I think I've learned, and if I could keep going, but those are some of the lessons I would go back and say, okay, Chip, you can, I saw the signs in advance before I had my NDE. I should have taken action. Similarly, I could have sort of looked at, oh, I have a bunch of transitions happening at once. Which are sort of early stage, mid stage, and later stage?
Right.
What are the coping mechanisms for each?
Well, in your new book, which I think is your 7th book, is that correct? Called Learning to Love Midlife. So not away from crisis, but actually, or just tolerating, but to love it, right? 12 reasons why life gets better with age.
So I actually sort of like the title. Sometimes I don't like my titles, but this one I liked. Learning to love midlife. So to learn to love something is like, by the time we get to whatever, 40, 50, 60 years old, we learn to love Brussels sprouts. Didn't like them when I was a kid. You learn to love classical music. Why not learn to love midlife as a life stage that is derided, and it's the Rodney Dangerfield of life stages. So people beat up on it. So I like that. And then the subtitle, as is true for a good subtitle, really tells you what the book's about. And the fact that it's a pro-aging, not an anti-aging message. There are 12 reasons why life gets better with age. And what I really wanted to do was help bring some social science, but also some anecdotes based upon having over 4,000 people go through the MEA program and process. It's been easier for me to understand this sort of in real life with people. And so I use a lot of real life stories in the book. And I wanted to write a book, frankly, that sort of told the MEA story. So you don't have to come down to Baja, or our new campus will be in Santa Fe, New Mexico. You don't have to come to us. You've got it all in this book. Now, we, of course, want you to come. And I think the experience of going through a transition or cultivating your purpose or learning how to own your wisdom is so much better suited and accelerated by actually being in person. And it's the ultimate sort of transformational travel experience. But I wanted to take it and put it into a book so it was more accessible to people.
Yeah. I love how you've broken it up. You have the physical life, emotional life, mental life, vocational life, spiritual life.
Yeah.
Maybe if we could start with the work stuff, the vocational life.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure we could list 100 things of people's tropes about what goes wrong with midlife at work.
Yeah.
But what goes right? What gets better?
For one, is you have more wisdom if you're cultivating your wisdom. And if wisdom is just metabolized experience, your painful life lessons are the raw material for your future wisdom. So the longer you've been on the planet, the more potential for wisdom you have, because you have more raw material of life experience. So that is working to your favor. Additionally, the brain, as Arthur Brooks wrote about it in From Strength to Strength, where he actually even in the book profiles MEA, he talked about the fact that as we get older, we move from fluid intelligence, which is being fast and focused with our brain, to crystallized intelligence, such that we can sort of see holistically and systemically. So that's actually quite good. That was really helpful at Airbnb when I was there, because the whole team was very focused and they had blinders on. And I was actually able to sort of stand above it a little bit and sort of say, hey, here's the future. Here's what I'm seeing. And here's some pattern recognition I'm seeing in how we're operating right now. And that, I think, has something to do with the fact that I had an older brain. So that's another, positive about being in midlife in the workplace. Additionally, one of the things that is nice about getting older is we learn how to be a little bit more emotionally moderate, like not sort of be so reactive. And I think that's really important in a team. As Google found with their Project Aristotle, the fact is that one of the most important qualities of a successful team is psychological safety. Mm-hmm. And generally speaking, the more emotionally moderate or less reactive you are, the more you create a space for people to feel safe. And that's good. But also, I think another thing, a couple things in that section of the book speak to the idea of getting off the treadmill. For a lot of people in midlife, it's the first time that they finally sort of looked around and said, like, oh my God, I am living my parents' success script. This was not my success script. This was someone else's. And I've been just reading the lines. And it's a time where people sort of take control over that. And they may decide, okay, I'm going to leave the job I've been in for a long time because I'm going to do the thing that I feel more passionately about, or I'm going to have a portfolio career doing a few different things. And then finally, we start to potentially later in midlife, especially if we have kids who have moved on and you're an empty nester is we start to have a little more time affluence. And what that allows for, it takes you back to becoming a beginner again. When we are so much the juggler of our schedule, which you know all about, Scott, and I definitely have known about, you don't have a lot of room for curiosity, and you don't have a lot of room for trying out new things and being open to new experiences because we're sort of in a transactional part of our life. But in mid to later midlife, so often in our 50s and 60s, that is when we have some space to become a beginner again. Now, this is really important. Most people in midlife, if you're at 54, which is the average age of the person who comes to MEA, you sort of think at 54, well, I'm going out to pasture. I'm on my last years at work or in life. But if the average MEA person thinks that they're going to live till 90, which is true in our survey we did, and your average age is 54, from 54 to 18, when you start adulthood, is 36 years. From 54 to when you think you'll die is 36 years, from 54 to 90. So you're halfway through your adult life. And that's why I like to ask the question, 10 years from now, what will you regret if you don't learn it or do it now? Because that question is such a prompt for people to say, like, oh my God, I don't want to have the anticipated regret of not doing that thing. And anticipated regret is a form of wisdom. So, long story short is I think that midlife is a great time to be in the workplace. I'm not saying there's not ageism. There's a lot of ageism. And it goes in both directions too. There's in an old school company, the young people they're actually the victims of ageism. But in a lot of companies, especially in Silicon Valley, ageism works against older people. So the most important thing I could say to someone who's out there in the workplace or in the job market in their 40s, 50s, or 60s, especially in a place like Silicon Valley, is if you show up with curiosity and a passionate engagement in what you're doing, people will not notice your wrinkles. They'll notice your energy. And that's, at the end of the day, what we resonate with.
That's beautiful. They won't notice your wrinkles and notice your curiosity.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in terms of retirement, right? This is one of the dirty words, or I guess in the old days, it was just what was expected when you hit 60 or 65 or whatever the number is. What's the trend now, and what do we encourage?
Well, let's recognize that retirement became a big deal in the 1930s with Social Security and pensions, and then years later AARP, and then retirement communities. In the 1960s, the idea of retirement was like, oh my God, I've done backbreaking work on the Ford assembly line for 30 or 40 years. I deserve this. And so you can completely get why retirement was the thing people were excited about, and go live in Sun City in Arizona and golf. The reason that the allure of retirement has sort of worn off is there are many reasons for it. But one is because we don't have as many people who are doing backbreaking labor. It's knowledge workers. And at 60, as a knowledge worker, you don't feel like, oh my God, I'm done. No, you're not. You have so much more ahead of you if you want. Now, some people don't want to, but a lot of people do. So number one is knowledge workers don't necessarily have to retire because it's their brain is keeping them alive or keeping them in the workplace, not their body. Secondly, is we're living longer. A lot of people are staying in the workplace by choice or by necessity. So if you're going to live till 90, you're not going to be able to live on your Social Security for that whole time if you want to keep a semblance of what you are currently spending. So you want to stick around. Thirdly, a lot of people are passionate about their work. I think that work is, for many people, as Khalil Gibran and the Prophet says, work is love made visible. And for so many people, the idea of work as the thing that is the motivating influence in their life, to take that away is almost like criminal. Because in some cases, what it does, there's actually some good research on this, that retirement actually accelerates your mortality by 2 years. And it's partly because you lose your purpose, you lose a sense of community, but also it's because, frankly, even though you have more time in your life, you get out of shape. Partly because you have less discipline and structure. And frankly, you're not at work as much, like trying to impress how you look to other people. So long story short is, working is, as long as you're not overworking, as long as you're not overly stressed, working can be very good for longevity.
Beautiful. And one of the stats I love is that if we change how we think about aging, finish that thought, how many years do we add on to our lives?
This is Becca Levy from Yale. So I love, I'm a geek. And so I love the fact we have all these social scientists who are supporting us with our curriculum. So Becca's work has shown that when you shift your mindset on aging from a negative to a positive, you gain 7.5 years of additional life. And that is actually more life than if you actually stopped smoking at 50 or started exercising at 50. So it's like, really? Just change your mindset. Well, it's not easy to change your mindset because there's a lot of societal norms and ways of thinking that are influencing your anti-aging perspective. But the research has been, checked many, many times, and it's very well respected. And that's actually part of the reason MEA was created, because if a pro-aging message like Becca Levy's message is so lost in society right now, how could we create a laboratory where we helped people to experience this idea of like, hey, maybe life gets better with age? And the U-curve of happiness research is also very interesting. It shows that generally speaking, around age 45 to 50, you bottom out in terms of happiness, but your mileage may vary. It can vary, on either side of that. And then after age 50, you get happier with each passing decade, and which is surprising because it is sort of at odds with, what we think of when we think of aging.
A lot of what is done, what you do at MEA is about the individual and our own relationship with aging and our own work. If you were consulting with a company and the company said, hey, Chip, this is great, I'm all in, what do we do? How do we incorporate all of our ages in a way that's incredibly healthy?
Yeah. So we have 5 generations in the workplace for the first time. By the year 2025, the U.S. Department of Labor predicts that the majority of Americans will have a younger boss. So we have an intergenerational collaboration happening in the workplace that's really unusual. Power is moving younger, partly because of digital intelligence, DQ, and yet often it's the older employees who have the EQ and DQ. So my book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, has one chapter in it, in particular, chapter 9, where I say, here are the 10 things a company could do to actually create a more age-friendly workplace. So I'll just tell you 2 or 3 of them. Number 1 is create mutual mentorship programs. Create programs that allow people to mentor each other like a yin and a yang. She knows this, but doesn't know that. He knows that, but doesn't know this. And they can learn from each other. It also helps with employee retention. Create a question on your work climate survey, your employee satisfaction survey. And the question is this: beyond your boss, who do you seek out for advice or wisdom? Now, that question, when we did that at Airbnb, and now a lot of other companies are doing it, really helped us to take what was intangible and not visible. In other words, who is perceived as wise in the organization? Mm-hmm. Who are the informal mentors out there? And allowed us to get tangible with it, which then allowed us to say, like, okay, what are the qualities of these people? Because these people are sort of like the wisdom keepers in the org. And they weren't just older people. They were people across all ages. So long story short is that allows you then to look at those people and say, okay, let's model them. Or maybe some of those people could become coaches, in-house coaches. Give you a third one, I would say, how do you create an ERG for the non-dominant age group in your company? If it's an old line company, it might be younger people. If it's like Airbnb, we created something called Wisdom at Airbnb. It was people 40 and older. And when we started it, we only had 1% of our employees who were 40 or older, amazingly. So long story short is that allowed that group of people to have a voice and to actually influence some of the decisions being made, not just for employees, but that group actually had a huge and profound impact on how we were building tools for hosts. Because generally speaking, our Airbnb hosts were older than our Airbnb guests because they had more space and they had a second home and et cetera. And so we had 25-year-old engineers and brilliant designers and strategists who were trying to build products for 52-year-old, hosts. And they weren't getting it right sometimes. And so having a collection of people representing the voice of the customer, of a customer that maybe the company didn't understand very well, was very valuable.
Fantastic. Well, I hope the book does very well. I'm sure it'll be a treasure trove of information for all of us about how do we get wiser as we get older. What's next? What's next for, MEA as you're continuing this mission? What's next for Chip?
Well, I have a daily blog that I love. I write a daily blog. You can find it on either chipconley.com or meawisdom.com. I'm just going to keep doing that. I am excited about our Santa Fe campus opening. It's a 2,600 acre regenerative horse ranch. with 2 retreat centers on it. And, people love Santa Fe for good reason. And so excited that's going on. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time with my sons after I get through the book launch and the ranch launch. I'm actually going to spend time with them next week too, for Christmas. But they live in Houston. They're 12 and 9. And I am just looking forward to hanging out with them a little bit more.
Fantastic. Well, Chip, thank you for being the wise human and the Mr. Midlife. We'll see if that sticks. I like it. Might be t-shirts.
A new podcast.
But thank you for the work you're doing in the world. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. I appreciate you too.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Until next time, be well.